Welcome to Weekend Ag Matters from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Join us for an in-depth look at Iowa agriculture. Here's your host, Dustin Hoffman.
Welcome into another edition of Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Hoffman. Russ Parker, Mark Magnuson, and Riley Smith will be coming up later on in the program. But let's go ahead and run down some of the headlines we were following this week. The markets are already volatile this time of the year, but when you add in a few global news headlines on top of that, you get what we are currently seeing in the ag marketplace. Chaos, and even more chaos. Michael Widener, Director of Grain Origination and Producer Strategy with Landis Cooperative, said everything is combining to create a perfect storm for market volatility.
Obviously, we've got U.S. weather as this crop goes through pollination, or some of it already has, but over the next 10 days, a hefty portion of it across the Midwest will go through pollination. We've got Middle East headlines back at the forefront, as well as overnight, some more tensions cranking up between Russia and Ukraine, which really impacted the wheat market today. We saw Kansas City wheat up almost 45 cents at one point, which would have been the limit. Chicago followed as well, and then we saw corn and beans hang in there all day and follow the leader there in the wheat market. So plenty to talk about, plenty of stuff going on. Had a couple crop reports to close out June, and on July 10th from USDA that were also modestly supportive to the grain complex.
Widener also said the weather raises some concerns over whether or not the corn and soybean crops will reach their estimated yield levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those reports were, I wouldn't say they were outright bullish necessarily, but they were definitely supportive and make things very interesting if we get some things to come together, i.e. China coming in, making some purchases, both on the 25,000 or 25 million metric ton on the soybean side. If they were to come in here and buy some corn, maybe some wheat and cotton, I mean, it's a pretty dynamic market and definitely makes it very critical that we see some of these trendline yields achieved in the U.S. Call it 183 on the corn, 53 or so on the beans.
And with both the Russia-Ukraine war and the U.S.-Iran conflict going on at the same time, two major shipping ports are closed right now, which adds immense pressure to the grain markets. However, Widener says this can open up some profit opportunities for U.S. farmers. Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is investing $500 million to strengthen the nation's beef processing capacity through its Strengthening Processing for U.S. Ranchers, or SPUR program. Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation Richard Fordyce says several USDA agencies will work together to determine eligibility and distribute the funding.
The Farm Service Agency is going to administer this program, but it's not going to be done at the county office level. It'll be done from headquarters in Washington, working very closely with the chief economist's office, who will help determine the calculation on the payment rate, and then the Food Safety Inspection Service, that are the keepers of all the records, right? So they'll be able to identify the number of head related specifically to a specific plant. So we'll get those numbers from FSIS, work with the chief economist's office to develop the payments. And then FSA at the headquarters here in Washington will be notifying those processors about their eligibility and their potential payment, and then how to go forward from there.
USDA has not notified eligible processors because officials are still compiling processing data and calculating payment amounts. Well, a stretch of northern U.S. is in the path for the ridge of high pressure, producing high temperatures hovering around the 100-degree mark through the week. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says the northern portions of the Great Plains are still experiencing high temps that began last week.
We started to see heat emerging from the western United States, and it really took hold across the northern Great Plains over the weekend, peaking on Sunday. And now as we move through this week, some of that heat is propagating eastward across the northern Corn Belt, the Great Lakes region, and then eventually reaching the northeastern and middle Atlantic states.
Despite the extremely hot weather in the northern Great Plains, the rest of the Midwest, including Iowa, is experiencing more normal temperatures for this time of year. Rippey says that even in the areas of the hottest temperatures, the system shouldn't be in place long enough to cause significant heat stress for corn or soybeans. And that's going to do it for the news headlines here on this edition of Weekend Ag Matters. We're going to turn it over now to Russ Parker and his faith-based Food for Thought segment.
I watched one of my favorite movies the other night. A river runs through it. It's a story of Norman McLean and his life growing up in Montana, with glimpses of his childhood, his youth, and eventually the later seasons of adulthood. The final scene, and especially the closing paragraph has always intrigued me. McLean describes the river as though it has a life of its own, flowing through the generations, carving its way over what he calls the basement of time, with words hidden beneath the rocks, ending with the line, "I am haunted by waters." In my own life, and maybe in yours too, we have memories that refuse to leave us, don't we? Certain places have a way of transporting us back into another time. Maybe a favorite fishing spot, the family farm, an old church, a country road. And somehow seeing that elderly man standing alone in a Montana river in that movie, weathered by experiences of life, always makes me stop and think. And I know Norman McLean wasn't writing a Christian allegory, and I don't believe he intended his words to point directly to Scripture. But great writing has a way of leading us to reflect on deeper truths. And as I listened to those closing words again, I couldn't help but wonder what it means to be haunted. McLean speaks of a river that has been there longer than anyone can remember. The Bible speaks of one who has been there before there were rivers, and before there were mountains, before Noah's flood, before time itself. Christ already was. John's Gospel opens with these words, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And McLean also writes of words beneath the rocks. That phrase makes me think about God's Word. Sometimes it lies just beneath the surface of our lives, waiting to be uncovered, and the words never changed. Life simply prepared us to hear them. Most of us think of haunting as something frightening, but it can also describe something that returns to our thoughts because it has profoundly touched us. Maybe as Christians we're meant to be haunted by God's presence and His faithfulness and His Word. And while Norman McLean writes that he was haunted by waters, I hope to be haunted by something even greater, the living water. May Christ return continually to our thoughts, shape our hearts, and remind us that He has been with us through every bend in the river of life. Food for thought, I hope. This is Russ Parker. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Russ, and that's going to put the wraps on segment 1 here of Weekend Ag Matters. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Mark Magnuson will be in with the next segment. Stay with us. You're listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.
Looks like another perfect day to get out there and enjoy the summer.
You hear that? Live music, laughing kids, the roar of the rides, and someone yelling, "Corn dogs!" That's Fair Spirit at the Iowa State Fair, August 13th through 23rd in Des Moines. 11 days of blue ribbon traditions, big summer nights, incredible food, and the kind of memories you talk about all year long. This is your Iowa State Fair. Plan your visit now at iowastatefair.org.
August 13th through the 23rd.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here is Mark Magnuson.
Mark Magnuson with the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm talking with some of the members of the team of the National Pork Board. And I'm joined by Marisa Rotolo and Paul Ayers. And Marisa, could you tell me please your role at NPB?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a veterinary epidemiologist and director of swine health at National Pork Board.
And then Paul, same question for you.
Yeah, Mark, I work for the MASH Office. We're an independent producer based in Southern Illinois. I'm also on the board of directors at National Pork Board.
So Marisa, whenever we're at World Pork Expo, it's always a great time for members of the media, members of people that are just visiting the show, I think, to get a general sense of kind of where we stand in the industry on certain topics. And one of those topics that we always talk about at World Pork Expo, now it's not always something that we want to talk about, but it's something that we need to talk about, and that's disease. So when we think about the situation right now for the swine industry, of course, we're always focusing on those foreign animal diseases that we need to be ever present or ever working to hopefully avoid and keep out of this country as best as possible. But then we're also dealing with those diseases that are endemic to the United States and that we're dealing with at all times. So when you think of the big picture right now, kind of where do we stand, do you think, in 2026?
I know we've had a lot of, real disease pressure the last couple of years, but I'm excited for where the industry stands today. So at National Pork Board, we've launched the National Swine Health Strategy, and this is a coordinated effort really focused on reducing the impact of domestic diseases while keeping an eye on foreign animal and emerging diseases. So this idea that we now have a unified goal and goals and priorities to set as our North Star for our industry, it's an exciting time.
And speaking of those goals and priorities, you always need to have those that you're always striving towards. And I know even with those endemic diseases that we've gotten so used to having to battle, that when we talk about the National Swine Health Strategy, that end goal is eradicating that disease. Now, how realistic that is in the short term, it's not always easy because you're still going to be dealing with it, but you do need to have that goal at the end of the track, don't you?
Absolutely. I think it's really good to have something to position as your North Star, whether it's PED elimination, PRRS elimination, reducing the spread of disease, right? So making sure that we've got one focus point being reducing the impact of domestic diseases, keeping an eye on foreign animal disease. It's a great place for us to be and a great rallying point.
Now, something I do struggle with a little bit when it comes to for example, what you mentioned, PRRS and PED, is that something that is always fluctuating in terms of that disease pressure, or is it something that is kind of a baseline as far as what we see with those diseases?
You really got to look at it from the perspective of the pathogen itself, and they're always evolving. They're always causing new issues, right? PRRS has always been a challenging pathogen for us. PED in itself has been more relatively stable. It has that seasonality component, tends to be more challenging in winter months. But at the end of the day, we've got some really good structures in place, really good people in place in order to keep up to date on how those viruses are changing and challenging our industry.
And Paul, some of the things we've talked about here today, for example, the National Swine Health Strategy, from the producer angle, what did you think about the fact that it's not National Pork Board setting up this whole operation and then saying, hey, this is how you should do it? It went to the producers first to say, what do you guys need? What needs to be in place for help in battling these diseases, and then putting the plan together?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm real encouraged by is the fact that this strategy is being led by producers, and that's very intentional. Unfortunately, producers have been on the backside of a lot of these diseases and felt the pain that they can have on their farms. So we've brought a great team together. We've established a swine health advisory committee, and that committee is tasked with providing producer feedback on the National Swine Health Strategy to ensure that actions that National Pork Board takes are relevant to what producers do on farm.
And do you think that energizes those producers knowing that they're so involved?
Yeah, I think it's been really good so far. We've already had one committee meeting, and during that meeting, we provided a list back to National Pork Board of 5 key focus areas that we need to focus on in the short term. As you mentioned, when we talk about endemic diseases like PRRS and PED and the long-term goal of eliminating them, those are very long-term, ambitious goals. But what we're trying to do is provide some near-term focus to help move towards those long-term goals.
When we're talking about the foreign animal diseases, of course, we always are thinking about African swine fever and building up those barriers. Are there other diseases that we need to have top of mind?
I would say from the perspective of foreign animal disease, we have the 3. We've got classical swine fever, African swine fever, and foot and mouth disease virus. And so it's important to remember that while we make advances in that African swine fever space, all of those advances will apply to our classical swine fever, our foot and mouth. So while ASF tends to be front of mind, it's always good to remember that we also have things in place for classical swine fever and foot and mouth.
And with African swine fever, where are we at right now with the vaccine process?
In relation to the vaccine process, you have to think about African swine fever. It's a very complicated virus. And so it's hard to develop vaccines that will really have that immunity that would reduce shedding and cause, we call it sterilizing immunity in the sense that it would knock it out completely. And so we do have a lot of good products out there that are being tested on the global stage, but in terms of the USDA and American viewpoint, we don't have a candidate or a vaccine in place at this particular point in time.
Paul, when we think about foreign animal disease from the producer side, is that something that is more difficult to talk with producers about because it is something that is farther away and it doesn't touch them every single day?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with foreign animal disease is keeping it front of mind. Right? It's something that hopefully, knock on wood, we never have to experience in the U.S., but we always need to be preparing in case we ever are faced with a foreign animal disease. I view it very similar to kind of like having an insurance policy. By preparing for a foreign animal disease, by participating in industry programs, whether it's the U.S. SHIP program, the Secure Pork Supply program, those are all steps producers can take to make sure they're prepared if we ever are faced with a foreign animal disease. So it's just important to keep those front in mind so we don't forget about it and so we're prepared.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, while we may not have a vaccine today, we do have very good programs like our Secure Pork Supply, like AgView, like Certified Swine Sampler Collector Program, which put us in a really good place from a preparedness and prevention part.
So, Marisa, is there anything else you'd like to let our Iowa viewers, our Iowa listeners know about when it comes to the work that you're doing with National Pork Board and just what you're thinking about right now?
Yeah, I would love for producers to know that as we, bring out this national swine health strategy, really think about it from the approach of two prongs. So we've got research to advance our knowledge base in each of these pathogen spaces, and then we've got education. So taking that research and translating it to the SLAT level into applicable SLAT level solutions for producers.
And then Paul, same question for you. Is there anything else you'd like to pass on to our Iowa listeners?
Yeah, I would just really ask Iowa producers and producers across the country to get engaged in the process, ask questions about the National Swine Health Strategy. If you have concerns or reservations, reach out to your producer groups, your state association. I think it's real important that we continue to get feedback from producers to lead this initiative and make sure we're providing resources in the right area.
And we hear that all the time, and it is so true that producer voices carry a lot of weight. What they say, can be very influential with a lot of groups and just the direction of the industry as a whole. So that is very important. Marisa Rotolo and Paul Ayers, my guests here today on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Mark Magnuson. Thank you to Marisa Rotolo and Paul Ayers of the National Pork Board for joining today's episode of Weekend Ag Matters. Coming up next on the show, Riley Smith will wrap things up with his segment. You're listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
In rural Iowa, we know you're sold on your local radio station. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network partners with local Iowa stations to deliver the latest in agriculture news, including grain elevator prices, market reports, and ag policy news. Trusted local voices, trusted ag content. This message is brought to you by your friends at the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here's Riley Smith.
Riley Smith, Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, on the phone right now with Dr. Peter Dorhout, Vice President for Research at Iowa State University. Peter, great to have you on the network today, and we are talking about a recent announcement of an award, a university-led research initiative to bolster the economic vitality of rural communities, which was one of 12 projects selected for the National Science Foundation's Regional Innovation Engines Awards. That was announced earlier this week. Of course, the program is called Rural Stamina, and we will get more into Rural Stamina itself later. But first off, what does it mean to be one of the recipients of those awards?
Well, Riley, thanks again for the opportunity to share a little bit more about the project. We're really excited. This has been a long journey over the last few years, engaging a lot of different stakeholders in our region and identifying where there were key opportunities for making some some necessary investments in new technologies that would actually help grow the innovation ecosystem here in Iowa and Nebraska. We ultimately centered in on biomanufacturing, using biomass and other biomaterials that are grown right here and produced right here in our region. That's a big push at the federal government. There's a strong interest in, say, growing the foundation that we already have here with the ethanol industries and the aviation fuel, among many other things.
So I see that, Rural Stamina stands for Ascending Rural Communities Through Sustainable, Transformative, Advanced Manufacturing Innovations and Alliances. Of course, long title, good to have that shorter form to make it a little more memorable, but let's talk about, how this will benefit those rural communities. There has been a lot of need to kind of bring business and bring support over there. So how exactly will Rural Stamina go about that?
Well, we're really focused on helping the agricultural industries move beyond what we would consider to be, say, traditional commodity agriculture by helping to create higher value products from crops and agricultural residues and biomass that's all produced here locally. And by being able to locate in rural communities, smaller businesses, entrepreneurial ventures, and startups, we think that would, by investing there, would ultimately be able to stimulate local economies and provide stamina within those communities.
And then as we look long term with Rural Stamina, I know this award through the National Science Foundation, you're looking at $15 million in funding over 2 years and up to $160 million over 10 years. Obviously, that is some great support that will really help not only get this off the ground, but help it continue to bolster those communities, right?
Absolutely. This is about initially creating the teams that are needed to launch new ideas, new businesses, to be able to assist with entrepreneurs who creating new technologies and want to test those new technologies. It's about getting that started, but it's really about being catalytic, making that investment and bringing others along into our ecosystem. There's a lot of interest in investment companies that would like to see biomanufacturing really grow in this country. Some of the challenges are it's such new technologies that are involved that being able to, say, de-risk some new ideas and make them attractive to future investors, that can often be a difficult time for a small company or even an established industry to start something new. These investments are really designed to help de-risk that, whether it's taking something that you have created at small scale and growing it to hundreds or thousands of gallons of production. Being able to do that takes some additional investments, and that's where Rural Stamina can be catalytic in helping to launch some new things and create new businesses.
Well, Peter, lots of great information today. For anybody who would like to stay up to date on really anything from Iowa State, but especially the Rural Stamina Project, how can they do that?
Anyone can go and check out ruralstamina.org, and you'll be able to connect with us directly and become part of our expanded network. We have some links that will enable you to connect with us directly to learn more about each of the programs as we get them launched. August 1st is really our official launch date, and But that website will enable folks to be able to connect with us, to receive information, to be part of our newsletter community. We already have 70 partners lined up and participating in this from really the early days until now. And so you'd be joining a really strong community of biomanufacturing interests.
All right, Peter, thanks again for the time today, and look forward to seeing what Rural Stamina does in the future.
Well, thank you for your time, Riley. I really look forward to continuing to share stories of other successes here and to connect with you and listeners who really want to help us grow the biomanufacturing here in Iowa and Nebraska.
And that again was Dr. Peter Dorhout of Iowa State University. And if you want to find full information on that project, visit ruralstamina.org. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Weekend Ag Matters. Thanks again for tuning in. You can listen to this episode and more by going to the podcast tab on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network website at iowaagnet.com. For Russ Parker, Mark Magnuson, and Dustin Huffman, I'm Riley Smith, wishing you a great rest of your weekend. Join us again next week for more Weekend Ag Matters.